We'll be reviewing today how to create a free property in Apollo. I've given this property a name, a free property example, and this is a Google Analytics Google Tag Manager free property for a new implementation. Once I've entered the name of my property, I'll be prompted to sign in with Google if I haven't already, and I'll need to grant access to the appropriate accounts. So when I click this, I'll get a dialog box that allows me to choose my account. So I'll choose the account that has access to the appropriate Google Tag Manager and Analytics permissions. And the first time you see this box, you may see a list of services. Go ahead and hit continue to grant Apollo access to appropriately publish. It's also important that the account that you're creating this under in Google has the appropriate permissions to be able to create new tag containers in GTM and to publish. So here I'll select my GTM account name, and then I can also enter my GA4 measurement ID. This will be a placeholder that says change me unless I enter something here. And to get your GA4 measurement ID, there's an article on Google support called What Happened to My Tracking ID. And if we scroll further down the page, we have an example of where and how to get your Google Analytics 4 property ID. And this is where we get the measurement ID from. So you're welcome to go to Google support and search for this article in order to find your appropriate measurement ID. I'll enter a placeholder here for now, and then I'll hit finish. From there, I'm taken to the deploy screen, and I can hit deploy now. And I'll again be prompted to sign in with the appropriate Google account and continue my access, which will allow us to make the publishes. So I'm going through the deployment process and we can see exactly what's happening. So we're retrieving the workspaces, deploying the variables, and we just have a few more steps and then we'll be live and ready in Google Tag Manager. Once this deploying variable step is done, we go on to the GA4 config tag, which is necessary to fire page views, and then our deployment has completed and is successful. So let's take a moment and go over to Google Tag Manager and see what has been published. Within my GTM workspace, I see a number of changes for a new implementation. So we have some variables, tags, and built-in variables that have been configured. First, we have the CJV measurement ID variable, and this allows us to specify the GA4 ID that we want data to go to if we're in debug mode or if we're not in debug mode. And this is going to fill in with the numbers that I filled in during my setup step. And if I'm in debug mode and I want to report to a different location, then I can adjust this number accordingly. Or if I'm okay with everything going into the same GA4 measurement ID, regardless of whether or not I'm in debug mode, I can leave this as is. If you did not specify the GA4 account ID during setup, this would be change me, and then you'd be able to modify it yourself and save it appropriately. We also set up the GA4 config tag, and this references our other measurement ID variable, which we'll see in a moment. And if we go into this, we note that we're sending a page view when the config tag loads. So we get our basic page views in GA4, and this loads on initialization across all pages. We have the debug mode built-in variable selected, which is referenced in our first tag. We have the environment name built-in variable, which is configured, which allows us to understand if we're in production or if we're in a lower environment like staging. And then we reference those in the final configuration setup, the LTV measurement ID. And this is a lookup table that corresponds the live account and the staging account or a lower environment with the appropriate GA4 measurement IDs. And these are taken from the input that we provided for our tag ID. And these can also be changed and adjusted if you do have a different measurement ID for your staging environment, which is recommended. So all of these tags are set up, and we would go through the normal publish process in terms of previewing to test or fully submitting so that we can go through the appropriate tag manager publishes from here to get things live.